You just inform when you are ready. Okay, thank you. So today is a continuation lecture of this topic, system modeling and simple control formulation for electrohydraulic actuation of linear motion. Last time I mentioned that electrohydraulic systems, their dynamics is nonlinear, but what we are studying is linear motion, motion of the piston along a straight line. In fact, we started discussing two types of arrangements. One was single acting cylinder, and the other was double acting cylinder. Mostly, we discussed about double acting single rod cylinder type, but that is more amenable to control. But double acting single rod cylinder, it requires lesser space. That's why that is more popular. As we will go along with the discussion, we will discuss other differences among these systems. We will consider energization by solenoid operated valve. That solenoid operated valve could be either a of modeling. We will consider zero lap valve. So which means if there is no activation to the valve does not allow any flow to connected. The moment it is energized, we have some. We require to excite the valve. Beyond that, dead signal, say over the range of plus minus 10 volt, there will be a region of about plus minus 1 volt in case of a valve with dead band, over which there won't be any excitation. So if it is a zero lap condition, there won't be any dead band. So the full range will be available for the control. And after this has been discussed in the last class, these systems, still we will just go through that, and different aspects of those systems will be discussed in a greater detail. Some parts have already been discussed. Some more issues will also be discussed, and from those detailed modeling, some realizations develop that from which different the comparison of these three kinds of cylinder arrangements will be discussed, and the discussion will end with a feed-forward PID controller for a simple case. We stopped prior to discussing the role of different elements of the controller, and today I'm just the presentation layout so that the sequence gives you an impression about different issues that we'll be covering in this presentation. I'm not too sure whether it will be over today itself or more class will require. In the last class, we talked about these two systems. One is a single acting cylinder in which one side of the piston has oil and the other is open. In case the cylinder is a double rod type, double acting type, both the sides of the pistons have oil. So, in this particular case of single acting cylinder, when high pressure pump fluid is allowed to enter into this chamber by the operation of the valve by actuation of this solenoid, so that this path gets activated and flow comes in from the pump at pressure given by P subscript P. This rod overcomes this external force and the friction and moves. Depending on the opening, the speed of the motion is dictated. So the objective of the controller formulation would be so that the prescribed demand for the motion is obeyed as closely as possible. In this kind of system, there has to be a retracting spring that would get compressed during the extension stroke, and when the valve is positioned to, this solenoid is activated so that this part of the circuit gets active. In that case, the flow from this chamber would come out and flow back to the tank. This is a three-port valve. Three-way means one is neutral, one is extension of the piston, and one is the retraction of the piston. And 3-port is pump port, cylinder port, and tank port. The cylinder port, normally we use the letter A. In case it's a double acting, we use letters A and B for the 2 ports. Here we have considered this port A is connected to the cap end, and this port B is connected to the rod end side. If we consider this piston, it has rod in case to the other side also, that would make it double acting double rod cylinder. And so when this piston is fully retracted, this piston would be fully extended, and for that, to accommodate that motion, we will be requiring this much extra space for the piston rod that would come out. So a double acting double rod cylinder requires more space in comparison to double acting single rod cylinder. So this particular variety is preferred over the double acting double rod type. And as I have told, it is 3x3 valve. Here it is 4x3 valve. 4x3 means 3 ways: neutral, extension, retraction, and 4-port. One is pump port, the other is tank port, A and B port for the 2 ends of the cylinder. In this case, we can avail the power from the pump so that we could have retraction of the piston that would be faster compared to this particular case, where it is caused only by the spring force. Here, over and above the spring force, we could have forcing by the oil also. And compared to this system, this is the retraction stroke. Here, the motion could be controlled in a better manner. Regarding the defined by ratio and corresponding to the, there are two sources of pressure increment. One is flow into the chamber, and other is the compression of the cylinder volume by piston motion. So if the piston motion expands, so if we consider all those cases, then for this single acting cylinder we'll find this equation, and for the double acting single rod cylinder, for these two chambers we'll be having two equations, and this dp dt or dp1 dt, that could be collected together to obtain the equation for the pressure transients within the volume of the cylinder. In case of single acting cylinder there is one oil volume. In case of a double acting cylinder we have two cylinder volumes. So otherwise I just stick to this brief summary. One more point I have added here that I mentioned in the last class later on. This is the formulation if we consider the oil to be compressible. In fact, at very high operating pressure that we normally employ in electrolytic systems, the oil compressibility cannot be neglected. But for the sake of modeling, if we neglect that effect, that is the bulk modulus, that modeling is achieved in the limit bulk modulus approaching infinity. In that case, the denominator of this equation would be, in this beta equation would be 0. So that will make the velocity of the piston rod multiplied by the flow area is equal to the discharge that is coming in. So that is pretty obvious, and that relation could also be obtained in the limit of bulk modulus approaching infinity. And this cylinder part model is interfaced with the modeling of the valve. As I have already told, we will be considering zero lap valve, and we will consider the leakage in the valve as negligible. In a later slide, I will explain the leakage part, etc. And basically, the tiny openings that are connected with the motion of the spool inside the valve creates a small orifice-like opening, and corresponding to that area we will be having the flow, and the area that will be opened by the movement of the spool, if there is no valve lap, the area would be proportional to the voltage. So that voltage multiplied by a valve constant, and then this is the effective flow velocity in the orifice. If we consider the loss term in the Bernoulli equation to be the most dominant term, then the flow velocity through the orifice will be, half rho v square is the pressure drop. So from that, the velocity the ideal velocity would be obtained in this form, and that multiplied by the area would give the discharge. So as we have discussed, in this particular case, by using a valve coefficient and the voltage, we have simulated the area part, and that gives rise to these discharge equations. In the two cases, one is a single acting cylinder and the other is double acting single rod cylinder, and this is the equation for the piston motion. The effective oil thrust minus the opposing friction and the external force is equal to the mass, actuated mass into its acceleration. So, any question here? If you do not have, then we move on to the next part that has also been discussed in the last class. It is the detailed modeling for the friction. One part of the friction is this, proportional to the velocity. This kind of friction is achieved when the motion of the piston is at a relatively high velocity, but before that high velocity is reached, we have to overcome the domain of the static friction. So because of the pressurization, if the force keeps on increasing, unless and until we cleared a high threshold pressure or high threshold force, the motion won't be generated, and if the motion is realized. And between the stiction and this fully lubricated viscous regime, we observe some kind of nonlinear variation that we term as the Strebeck effect. In fact, if you remember, normally in comparison to the static friction, the dynamic friction is a bit lower. Even for solid-solid contact, the difference between solid-solid contact and lubricated friction is, in case of lubricated friction, the stiction force is far too lower than the solid-solid friction. For the sake of the easy visualization, we have shown this static friction to be relatively high, but if it is well lubricated friction, this part is indeed negligible in part. But again, between the friction transformation corresponding to the lowering of friction from the static friction level to the dynamic friction level, and that happens because of the seals that we use over the piston. We just consider the valve here. Here we have the land, and at the end of the land we have a tiny O-ring, so that we do not have any leakage through this space. This is the external part of the valve, and we should not have oil dripping out of the valve. That's why we use tiny O-rings at the end lands of the valve. But in case of the cylinder, what we have we have one chamber here. If we consider this is the external part and we do not want any leakage across the piston, so here we'll be having O-ring, but here instead of O-ring it will be, it will be a much thicker seal. We do not term that as O-ring, though we have shown here the piston by straight line, but it has some thickness, and along the entire thickness we'll be having the seal material, and that seal material, what happens when the piston velocity is low, that seal does not get fully squeezed, and as a result the full lubrication does not develop at a low pressure. It is only falls into the partially lubricated regime, and that squeeze of the sealing material, that we can consider very much like over the seal we have small bristles that we have over the toothbrush. If we press those toothbrush with a high force, then those bristles over the toothbrush gets deformed, and if we at a relatively high pressure, that deformation would be complete, and in this particular case we'll be having a well developed clearance path that will provide high lubrication. In case of a single rod cylinder, the seal would be such that even at a very high velocity, the deformation would be only partial and there won't be any leakage coming out of the cylinder. But that means in this particular case, be quite high, whereas in this particular case, the friction force won't be that much high. Okay. But here, where the rod comes out, we'll be having a number of O-rings that will take care of the external leakage. So here there will be some source of the static friction component. That's why in this diagram we have shown reasonable amount of static friction, so that at the end seal where the piston rod comes out, or in case of single acting cylinder, across the larger diameter of the piston will be having seal material, and as it wherever we want to stop the external leakage, there will be some amount of friction, and that friction, that static component of that friction would be a reasonable amount. That's why in case of a hydraulic cylinder, we normally encounter this friction zone, then this falling regime over which the bristle gets squeezed, and because of that squeezing, the lubrication starts developing, and we have a fall of the friction from the, so to say, solid kind of friction that has been encountered prior to the lubrication getting available. And prior to this bristle getting squeezed, there will be a regime where some energy we require to expend for the bristle deformation, and in that regime, in fact, we'll be seeing some increase in friction, but that part is normally negligible, and in Tustin model, this rising part is neglected, and we use this kind of equation for the friction. It is, a very elaborate kind of friction, while making the control model, we may not consider all aspects of friction. Some part of the friction will be considered and some part would be neglected. The idea of the controller is to determine the voltage that would make the piston acquire the demanded speed or the demanded hold to the external force at the demanded displacement. So for quick computation, so that the entire calculation can be implemented in real time, we often impose different kinds of approximations so that the calculations that are needed to estimate the voltage and fit that voltage in the actual hardware to make that computation executable in real time, we often make many assumptions. We also make certain assumptions so that a nonlinear form of equation does not develop, because a nonlinear algebraic equation will have many roots, and which particular root to be selected, that will lead to some confusion. That's why we try to keep the scheme of determination of that voltage pretty simple so that it can be estimated online. Today I am elaborating this part a bit because already I have discussed the way the feed-forward voltage estimate is made. Besides this, here we have just mentioned about only the friction force, and here we have mentioned how we expect this friction force to vary with piston velocity. Besides this friction, the valve that we have discussed here, a bit elaborate discussion of the valve will be taken next, and first we'll consider this valve and then this valve. So, this is a new element of the study that we have not considered in the last class. This kind of diagram we picked up to explain the lap condition. If the land position is such that when the external excitation is not given, for moving the spool, this phase and this phase will this direction as soon as we and the opening would be created. So in this particular case, the spool displacement and the identical. But if it is a dead valve with large dead band, then we require some amount of voltage to be given so that this edge, which is normally a bit inside, would move and align it to this particular edge of the sleeve opening, and up to that voltage excitation there won't be any orifice, actual opening in this orifice. And we are also considering here, the radial clearance is relatively small, so that makes the if the circumferential or peripheral opening of this sleeve port to be equal to this theta subscript s is for the spool, and if the radius is spool radius is r subscript s, then r into theta is basically the length of the circumferential would give the opening here. So I mean, here we are considering just two cases. In one case, I mean, we have given a positive excitation, so the left side land of the valve is moved towards this side, and when we give the negative excitation to the other solenoid, then the opposite land is moved to the opposite side. So if it is positive xv, it is negative xv, and we have written it as yv. So I mean, just you have to do some mental overlap. Here it is two different lands. It has been shown differently for positive excitation and negative excitation. Actually, when we have this positive excitation, this land would move towards very much like this land towards the left side, because this is a connected member, and here we have shown two ports to the cylinder, one here and one here. These are not two ports. This is one, and this is the same port. It is the same port has been shown as two different ports, one for the positive excitation, the other for the negative excitation. So mentally you should consider that, I mean, we do not have this, and this is only one port, and this line is a continuous one, so that this land and this land is joined by the we have leftward movement of both the lands, and when we have rightward movement, we have rightward movement of both the lands. Is this part clear? So that is how the internal arrangement of this particular valve for the single acting cylinder we have. Here we have three ports: pump port, tank port, and control port. And if you look at this diagram, I mean, this is the pump port, this is the cylinder port, and this is the tank port. And as I was telling, I mean, though we have shown two cylinder ports, but it is for two different kinds of excitation. It is basically the same cylinder port. When we have positive excitation, only in that case the pump port gets open, and we have flow entering here, and that flow gets fed to the cylinder. This is a situation. Okay, the pump flow gets routed through the cylinder, this port A to the cylinder. For the negative excitation, this spring retracts the piston, and flow comes from this cylinder through this port A back to the tank. That is the situation shown on this side. I mean, the flow comes from the cylinder and leaves by the side of the other land back to the tank. I believe the connectivity between these two figures are clear, right? And we have discussed this part also. I mean, when the opening, axial opening and the radial clearance are equal, we have a jet angle equal to 45 degree. If this land is quite inward, then we'll be having flow that is parallel to the axis of the spool. And so with the land motion, we have a variation of the jet that is formed at the metering port, and this angle keeps on varying. And as a result of this variation, because of this, but at the open port, we have a pure radial exit or radial entry. So there is some axial momentum associated with this flow, and with this flow, there is no axial momentum. So in the meter port, the axial momentum contributes a force on the spool, and that force is nothing but the difference of momentum at the inlet minus the momentum at the outlet. Since the flow at the outlet is radial here, the momentum component would be 0, and in this, for the positive excitement, inlet flow is metered and exit flow remains unmetered. But for negative excitation, the inlet flow, the unmetered inlet flow is radial, but metered outlet flow is inclined. In this particular case, this axial component of the momentum is opposite to the direction of spool displacement, and in this particular case, the contribution of the axial momentum is in the direction of the spool displacement. But remember, in this particular case, this is the inlet and this is the outlet, and the force on the spool is the difference of momentum to momentum. We should subtract from the momentum at the inlet, from its axial component, we should subtract the momentum contribution from the outlet. So if we consider that, first to do that, momentum is mass flow rate into discharge. Mass flow rate is density times the flow velocity in the area. So for the velocity, we have this again twice into pressure drop by rho into the valve coefficient, that is at the metering orifice, that is a V1, and for corresponding Q1, this velocity, it has been multiplied by Rs into theta is the peripheral opening, xv is the displacement of the spool, and one discharge coefficient we have used to obtain the discharge. Here, to obtain the velocity with the ideal velocity, we have multiplied a velocity coefficient. This top line corresponds to this part of the diagram, and this bottom line corresponds to this part of the diagram corresponding to negative excitation. And for each case, we are writing the equation for the steady flow force. Why we call the steady flow force? Here we are trying to evaluate the force at a particular steady displacement. I mean the spool could hold a particular position, or the spool could keep on moving. We are considering two different cases. One, the spool is at a particular constant displacement, and the corresponding force we are calling the steady flow force. And if the spool velocity is constant, the corresponding contribution we are terming that as transient flow force. So steady flow force corresponds to a constant displacement of the spool, and transient flow force corresponds to a constant velocity of the spool. So when we, for the steady flow force, this xv for the, it is corresponding to the positive displacement, this yv corresponding to the negative displacement. Here, why this minus sign is coming? This minus sign is coming because the direction of the axial momentum at the inlet is opposite to the spool displacement. So basically you should see, right, I mean this is the inlet momentum minus 0. I mean this basically we have rho into Q1 into this V1. So when we do that, this square root term, we have one square root here, another square root here, and those two removes the square root. So that's why we get a clean twice PP minus P1 and divided by rho, and here rho into V1, so that into rho takes out the rho. So these two PP minus P1 is a contribution of the multiplication of this and this, and the outside part CV, CD, RS, theta S, XV, etc. those appear in this equation, and this cos alpha 1 comes because we need to take the component of this momentum along the direction of the spool displacement. So that gives us the minus cos alpha 1. Okay, so this is the momentum at the inlet in the direction of the spool displacement, and that minus 0 does not alter the representation. So it shows that the partial derivative of this steady flow force with respect to the spool displacement is a negative contribution. So it is very much like a spring. I mean, if we try to give a displacement to it, the flow develops in a manner so that the spool tries to close it. This negative sign of this coefficient implies that the force contribution due to the displacement is such that it tries to nullify the developed force. And in the other case, for the outflow condition, if we try to write that, then the momentum at the inlet is 0 minus, we should multiply these two terms, so that gives us twice P2, and this CV, CD, RS, theta S, CV, CD, RS, theta S, YV, etc. and this plus cos alpha 2 because of taking the axial component of the associated momentum. So in this particular case also, del Fs del YV is also negative. So it shows that in this particular case, the contribution of the steady flow force is a centering kind of force. The centering force, it implies the system would remain stable. Is this clear? Is this stability aspect clear? Without any response, I just hope it is clear. Now we go for the analysis of the transient flow force. I mean, that we try to obtain corresponding to constant x dot v or constant y dot v. The way we have written here, this subscript T implies transient flow force. So this should also be corrected. So, I mean, when the spool is fully closed, there is no flow here. As we are opening the orifice here, this velocity keeps on increasing, as a result of which the mass that flows through the valve keeps on accelerating. In order to accelerate the oil mass, we need to exert a force along the direction of acceleration, and an opposite reaction force will expect on the land. That is how we have obtained the expression for the transient flow force. It is XPA is this length. This length multiplied by this cross section area gives the mass content here, and multiplied by the this distance into the cross section area is a volume, multiplied by the density is the mass content inside it, and its acceleration is given by dq1. Q1 by AS is the axial velocity here. So this mass into the rate of change of velocity, that is the transient flow force. So I mean, so here this is the positive velocity, and the force direction as we are seeing is on this direction. That's why actually the acceleration of the fluid mass in this direction is equivalent to deceleration of the fluid mass in this direction. So the force on the spool is in this direction. That's why we have this transient flow force contribution as negative. And if you look at this side, we'll see this, while in case of opening, we have a positive coefficient, and in case of flow to the tank, it is during the extension of the piston, it is during the retraction of the piston. In case of extension, we have a positive coefficient. In case of retraction, we have a negative coefficient. And as we have discussed, the negative coefficient implies a stabilizing force. So here we see the transient, in case of the transient flow force contribution is a destabilizing contribution when we are trying to extend the piston by feeding the pump flow to the cylinder. But when the cylinder flow is moved to the tank, we have a stabilizing transient flow force contribution. But whatever be it, at all conditions, overall dynamics should be a stable dynamics. So we do something for the control of the valve positioning, so that this positive coefficient, by some external action, the combined effect would be a negative coefficient, and that kind of control we need to incorporate for stabilization. What that contribution would be, as we move along, we will talk about the PID control system, and in that PID controller, we'll see how the D gain could provide us this kind of artificial negative coefficient to nullify the intrinsic positive coefficient if it emerges in simple model. So in that way, the modeling provides us some internal insight that guides the controller formulation. And here, though we have writing this force, and if those forces are used to write the dynamics of this spool motion, we'll get a differential equation. But as we have mentioned, this maximum opening is of the order of micron. So the mass of the spool is much less than the mass of the piston. So in no time corresponding to an impressed voltage, an opening, a steady opening would be obtained here. So what we do, corresponding to the dynamics of the actuator piston, we neglect the dynamics of the spool motion, and that leads us to this kind of algebraic equation. So that is the implication of the word fast. Just a moment here, I'm coming. And again, if you look at this diagram and assume this and this are the same port in a continuous spool, then the flow that comes from the pump goes to the cylinder. If we assume so that is not a true picture. Part of the flow would also leave through this port. But when we have a positive displacement to this side, this land would cover up this port. So because of this overlap here, and if the radial clearance is very small, then really we'll be having a very small amount of leakage. So if we assume that the entire pump flow goes to the cylinder, if we write so, then basically we neglect this leakage. And in order to develop the feed-forward controller that we have discussed in the last class, we have neglected that contribution. So these are the usual considerations that are employed so as to obtain a simple equation for the evaluation of the voltage requirement for the valve. So this negligible leakage that is connected with the negligible radial clearance, that is highlighted here. So I believe now the different words, this zero light, fast, proportional, all are clear to you. Also here we have discussed one part. I mean, this is the compressible modeling, and in the limit of infinite bulk modulus, we incompressible flow model. So all these here also we see that there are relatively complex variation of the friction force, but in a simple model, since it's a lubricated system, we'll consider the static friction to be negligible and friction proportional to the piston velocity. A simple model could be used. Another possible simplicity could be this model. I mean, a static friction plus this linear variation. We could neglect this part. The extension of this static regime, where it terminates at the zero velocity, this particular friction we term to be the Coulomb friction. So in a simple model, the Coulomb friction could be considered to be equal to the static friction, and from that Coulomb friction we could assume the fully lubricated viscous regime could be beginning. So far, now here we are showing the 4x3 solenoid operated valve with four land spool. There also we have discussed, we have two kinds of spool. One is a 3-land spool and one the other is 4-land spool. In a 3-land spool, the pump port and tank ports are metered and cylinder flow remain unmetered, and just 3 lands make the valve smaller. And in case of a 4-land valve, we have 2 ports metering the flow to 2 chambers of the cylinders, and the length of the peripheral cuts at the 2 ports are different. For the tap end side, the cuts are longer, and for the rod end side, the cuts are shorter, and this ratio of the port cuts, ideally this should be equal to the flow area within the cylinder in the 2 chambers. But the ideal condition are not often realizable, so maybe we consider the ratio of the peripheral cuts, their length, that ratio is close to the ratio of the cylinder cross section of the side of the chambers connected to the respective ports. Now, in this particular case, we have 2 ports, this A port and B port, and similarly to the other case, we have written the velocity at port A and port B. Velocity of the port A is routed to the cap end side, and that we normally denote by the subscript 1, and the rod end side discharge we usually denote by subscript 2. So these are the for positive excitation, and these 2 equation corresponds to the negative excitation. In case of a single acting cylinder, in every case we had 1 line, but here for every excitation we have 2 sets of velocity and discharge because we have two metered ports. In the metered ports, we have the jet angle formation, and in the open ports, the velocity remain radial, and also since it's a full opening, the velocity remains low as well. In this particular case, the low or high does really the whatever with the nature of the velocity at the unmetered port is not our botheration because the unmetered flow is radial and there is no axial component of that flow. So when the flow is radial, it does not matter much whether the velocity is high or low. And in the same way, we will consider the momentum of the inlet flow along the direction of displacement minus momentum of the exit flow in the direction of displacement. In the other, if you look at one particular condition when we have this pull displacement, I mean from the pump the flow is coming here, it is entering and it is leaving the valve to port A by this path. So it is an exit flow. And then the flow comes in by this path and leaves the valve, so enters the valve by this path. So this is the basically the inlet flow and this is the exit flow. So these two contributions are to be considered. Another inlet flow is here, but we did not consider its momentum because it is radial. Another inlet flow is here. Again, its contribution we did not take because it is radial. Sorry, no, not this one. I mean, this is the inlet to the valve. This is the exit from the valve. This is inlet to the valve. So this inlet contribution we need not bother. And this is the exit flow from the valve. And this exit contribution about which we did not bother. Yes, someone was asking something.
Sir, can you explain it again? I cannot understand this.
I mean, when
this part means inlet and outlet parts.
Yes, I mean this is the positive displacement. When this is the positive displacement, the entire assembly goes to this side. So we have from the pump that the flow that comes in, that pump flow leaves by this path. I mean this thick arrow and this thick arrow, they are paired. Okay, and this flow goes to the cylinder, the cap end side. It pushes the piston, and from the other side the flow comes in, and by this angular jet it enters the spool, and by this port it leaves the valve and proceeds to the tank. Is this clear?
Sir, why sir in B ports the water or fluids will coming? Sir, because here the pump port is
this port, you mean to say?
No, sir. Unmetered port, like say B port.
B port?
Yes, sir.
I mean, between this we have the cylinder. I mean, this is A port, this is B port. So this.
Okay, I understand, sir.
Is it clear? So that is what I am trying to say here. I mean, this is a simple system we have discussed first, and we are elaborating different modules of it. So this is the module here for the valve cylinder assembly. First, we have discussed about the friction force. Next, we are discussing about the valve. First, we have completed both the aspects for the single acting cylinder. Now we are doing for the valve for the double acting cylinder. Okay, so this port A is connected to the cap end side. That's why I told port A is connected to 1 and port I think I should also. I mean, though I have given this the PDF version of this PowerPoint in your WhatsApp, I have not loaded it yet in the Google Drive. So after all this, incorporating all these modifications, I'll do that. So this A port and chamber 1 and this B port and chamber 2, these are related here. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So the same symbols, I mean, this distance is port A to the tank port, port B, pump port to the B port to the tank port. So these distances would be required to write the transient force, to formulate the transient force. Okay. So coming back to that, so when we have positive excitation denoted by this thick arrow, the flow comes in by this, leaves by this, goes to the cap end side of the cylinder, pushes the cylinder to the rod end side, and from that chamber flow comes out and it enters by metering port B and proceeds by port T to the tank. Okay, now we have two inlets, one at this pump port and one at this B port, and you have two outlets, one at port A and one at port T. But this port P and port T, we did not bother about this. We should consider this inlet and this outlet. Is that part clear? For modeling of the.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So that's why we have this cos alpha B first and then cos alpha A next. Cos alpha B means, taking the component of inlet momentum along the direction of spool motion. That's why minus cos alpha B. And this plus cos alpha A is resolving the momentum of this angular flow along the direction of displacement. So that is how we obtain this equation. Okay. And for negative excitation, we have displacement towards this side and corresponding flows shown by these thin arrows. So if you follow this, you can follow this as well. And if there is any mistake, you can detect those mistakes as well. And here also you will find that the steady flow force coefficients emerge positive in all the cases. Even if you consider the case of 3-land valve, only that particular case I have not explained here, but in the detailed document with text explanation, there the equations for the 3-land valve is also given there. So, but if you understand that, you can write the equation for the 3-land valve also. And if you look at the transient flow force, here again, in earlier case, we are having one component only, but here we'll be having, we have some flow acceleration at this side and some flow acceleration at this side. When this xv is a constant motion, with the motion, this flow keeps on increasing, this flow also keeps on increasing. So there will be two transient contributions, and this contribution is along the direction of the displacement, motion. This contribution is opposite to the direction of motion. So one contribution is positive and the other contribution would be negative. So that is how with two parts we obtain the expression for the transient flow force. And in order to have stabilizing contribution, the sign should be negative, and in this particular case, by proper choice of these lengths xat, xpb, xbt, etc., we can really make the transient flow force contribution stabilizing type. So that is another advantage of this double rod cylinder. I mean, this kind of valve, again I repeat, these 4-port valves, PTAB, if you go here, this PTAB, we have for the double rod cylinder. What is happening? Okay, so when we have two cylinder ports, we have a situation where we can really have a positive transient flow force contribution, negative transient flow force contribution, and negative contribution implies a negative stable damping. So in that way also, between these two arrangements, this arrangement is superior to this arrangement. Again, if we go back here, we have discussed the details of both these cylinders. We have discussed the details of both the valves. Now, rather flow part of both the valves, there is a solenoid excitation for these valves also. So corresponding to that, we need to discuss about the solenoid part, and this solenoid modeling I have discussed in the last class. That solenoid modeling we have discussed in a general manner, as if this solenoid is actuating the poppet at the inlet of an engine cylinder that could be corresponding to a fuel admission or air admission, or it could be for operating the exhaust valve of the cylinder as well. In case of a proportional valve, we'll be having two solenoids at two ends, and that is symbolically shown here. One solenoid on this side, it would excite the spool to move towards it, and the other solenoid on the other side would excite the spool to move towards it. And when the spool moves, we'll have the corresponding flow situations that we were discussing so far. And but as we have told, in our case, this movement of the spool is linked to the movement of this piston, and this piston and associated the mechanism, their mass is much higher than the mass of the spool. So compared to its dynamics is fast, and compared to the dynamics of the small spool mass, the dynamics of the coil current is even faster. So compared to the piston dynamics, we could neglect the dynamics of both the spool of the valve as well as the current variation in the solenoid. But if the solenoid is used to control this valve, then we need to process the dynamic equation of the solenoid. This spool mass excited by the solenoid, and that here we have modeled the dynamics. It is the inertia of the spool mass. It is the spring force emerging from this spring, and it is the force that is a result of the electromagnetic action here. And in the last class, we have discussed how to go for feedback and feed-forward modeling, not connected to this system, but for the valve, our electrohydraulic system. But same concept could be used here as well to split the two equations and develop the controller for this particular poppet valve. We are not going to that detail. Here, what we are writing here is basically, even in this case, when we have this solenoid excited, the spool is moving towards this, and this, as this spool is closing down the gap, the decentering force that emerges out of the magnetic action, that becomes stronger and stronger. And if the movement is too close, then loss of stiffness will completely dominate over the stiffness of the spring, and even if we withdraw the excitation, the spring won't be able to push it back. So in order to avoid that kind of situation, basically the solid length of the spring here should be made sufficiently long that would not allow the magnetic forcing that is getting in higher and higher with the closing of the gap. That if the solid length of the spool does not allow the spool to come in the vicinity, so that this magnetic part dominates over this spring, would never happen. Then once we withdraw the current, the spool will move back to its neutral. Okay, so again here, the detailed modeling aspect gives us that insight. Okay, and right now I am skipping this part. Maybe today I will complete with the feed-forward PID controller formulation that we discussed in the last class. And in the next class, we will discuss about the pump type and the role of the different parts of the controller. So just to complete the discussion that we are having today, it is the system that is taken up for the feed-forward PID controller. It is a double-acting single-rod cylinder. We have a payload here, and this is the generic symbol of the LVDT. This LVDT feedback and the demand feedback both enters the controller, and there the difference between these two is calculated as an error by this equation, and this error is utilized in the feedback controller to calculate a feedback voltage in this form. And this demand is also fed to the feedback controller, and that in that feed forward controller, another part of this voltage is calculated. Basically, the controller model of the voltage is done in this manner. It has a feed forward part plus a feedback part. It should be such that the feedback voltage should be less than the feed forward voltage. And with this controller model, I mean, the schematic is evident here. So this VF plus VB is generating a voltage, and there is a valve control card. If the voltage is positive, it is fed to one solenoid. If the voltage is negative, it is fed to the other solenoid. In this way, I mean, a positive voltage is utilized to have an extension motion of this piston. See, if the positive voltage goes here, if it is fed here, when it is excited, this side of the valve gets activated. So pump flow goes to the port A, and it pushes the piston towards this side. The flow comes out through port B. It enters and goes to the tank. So that happens for the positive excitation, and for the negative excitation, this part gets activated. So the pump flow goes to port B, goes here, causes a retraction. The flow comes out from this side, enters by port A, and goes back to the tank. So correspondingly, we'll be having this velocity of the piston here, and if we consider compressible flow, the flow that reaches the cap end is if the compressibility effect is neglected, this discharge is proportional to this velocity. So AA1 into V. For positive excitation, we'll be having this QC positive, and for negative voltage excitation, we'll be having this QC negative. So since this positive velocity means extension, and this extension is achievable with positive voltage here, and this negative velocity means retraction, and that retraction is achieved by the negative excitation fed here. So in consistency to that, this cap end discharge model and this rod end discharge model is written here in incompressible manner. Okay, so with those modifications, these are basically, as I have told, these are the beta tends to infinity situation. and this velocity, actuator velocity, this actuation velocity is proportional to the discharge here, as we are seeing here. So, and so basically the velocity of this piston gets translated as jet velocity here, and the jet velocity square is nothing but the proportional to the pressure drop. So you can really see half rho v square is proportional to this pressure drop. So for positive demand, we have pump flow going to port A, and coming this flow entering the port B and going back to the tank. So PP minus P1 is the pressure drop at this end, and P2 minus 0 is a pressure drop at this end. And similarly for the negative demand, we have P1 to 0 drop here and PP to P2 drop here. So that is how these equations are written for positive demand part and the negative demand part. And then we also split the one splitting is overall V is this 2. So overall V square is Vf square plus twice Vb into Vf, just because of this. And here also we see this demand is response plus the error. So demand square is response square plus twice into response into the error, since error is small. So if we make those similarly, not only the response and the demand, but also we have corresponding equation for the acceleration part and the velocity parts. So if we substitute all these, then we'll be getting the feed forward voltage corresponding to the positive demand and the negative demand. And for positive demand, we should write the equation so that the voltage becomes positive, and for the negative demand, we should write the equation so that this voltage becomes negative. That is connected to the connectivity of the valve that I have explained here. And in both the cases, we obtain a linearized aerodynamics equation. In the last class, I told about this, but in today's presentation, I have given the intermediate steps as well. So here it is basically valve into AA1, so the flow that comes from the pump and goes to the cap and cylinder. So that's why PP minus P1 by rho, this part we are having, and that corresponds to a positive velocity. And similarly for the rod end side, for negative excitation, that is written in this way, we have this equation. And for the rod end side, similarly we have two equations, and in each case from here we are getting two equation corresponding to the pressure for positive excitation and negative excitation, and from this we are getting the expression for rod end side chamber pressure for positive excitation and negative excitation. And this is our equation for the cylinder piston. So here for x double dot we are substituting AD minus E double dot, and for this X, we are having X, demand minus error for X dot, demand dot minus E dot. So from here to here, these two terms has been sided with this, and this P1 E1 minus P2 V2, these are kept on this side, as well as this FC. So as I have told, here we have considered only the viscous friction contribution in this equation. Okay, and this is the external contribution from the external spring. Okay. So now for this P1, depending on positive velocity demand, expression for positive voltages are utilized, and for negative displacement, the expressions for negative voltages are utilized to write for P1 and P2. We have substituted that, and in this equation you see we have the velocity squared term and the voltage squared term. So for velocity squared term, this demand squared term we have taken out. That leaves us 1 plus twice E dot by demand velocity. And for the voltage square, similarly, there would have been 1 plus twice VB by VF, but that V square is in the denominator. So when we take that towards the numerator side, the plus in the denominator becomes a minus in the numerator. Okay. So in this way, we put up the linearization of these two expressions also. To convert this equation in two parts, and from these two parts, if we take the higher order, group the higher order terms together, from here the error related part has been transferred into one equation, and the higher order demand related term has been grouped in another equation, and this external force has been clubbed in this equation. Similarly, on this side, the large terms have been grouped together, and the remaining terms have been grouped in this fashion for the two cases, and from these two equations, for the positive velocity demand, we have got one expression for positive voltage. If you look at this equation, it will end up as a voltage square equation for the feed forward part. Both the roots are admissible, positive as well as negative. So in which case, what sign we have to take, that depends on the connectivity between this valve cord and the solenoids. The way we have connected here, we would be having extension motion for positive excitation and retraction motion for negative excitation. Had this polarity of the valve are reversed, then here also a minus sign would have come. But so what I am telling, which route to take in what case, it depends on how we have connected the valve control card with the solenoid. And from the other equation, we have written one error equation, but do not get confused by that one error equation. Here this mod sign has been cleverly used so that after utilizing the mod sign, we have identical expression for the error dynamics, both for positive demand as well as negative demand. But if you look more minutely, for positive demand, this is positive, and for negative demand, this is negative. And similarly, for this positive demand, this is positive, and this negative demand, this voltage is negative. So, the actual reversal of sign that is present in this part, that has been absorbed by clever exploitation of the modular sign, and with that clever use, we have obtained one equation for the error dynamics. So that is the equation what we're getting. So here, whatever we have here, see, all the coefficients that are here, those should be read as positive, because this is positive, this is positive, this is, this B is, okay, this B is this term. So if you look at B, everything is positive. So B is individually positive. After the modular sign, this is also positive. So whatever appears in this equation are positive, and the negativity of any overall term has been the result of the what we have, what emerges from the modeling. So in this way, we obtain one second order equation for the error dynamics. And if we consider this to be a variable, instead of instead of error, integral error dt, if we define as a variable, then it becomes a third order equation. So in absence of the integral controller, it remains a second order equation. In presence of the integral controller, it becomes a third order equation. Is this clear? Are this clear? So with this recapitulation plus new elements, I want to close the lecture today here, and one more hour, I think that will be sufficient. Next Saturday will take us to the end of this part. So if you have any question, you can ask. Otherwise, you can consider the presentation today to be over. Any question? Gustav? Gustav? So I end the lecture now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.